Marcus Williams had always been the guy people called when things got messy. At 32, he had built a reputation in the small mountain town of Cedar Ridge as someone who could handle difficult situations, whether it was talking down angry customers at the local hardware store where he worked, or mediating disputes between neighbors. Marcus had a gift for staying calm when others lost their heads. That's why Sheriff Peterson stood in the doorway of Marcus's modest apartment on that cold Tuesday morning in October, hat in hand, and worry lines creasing his weathered face. The sheriff had driven up the winding road to Marcus's place, rehearsing what he would say. But now that he was here, the words seemed harder to find. "Morning, Sheriff," Marcus said, opening the door wider. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." Peterson nodded gratefully and stepped inside. The apartment was simple but clean, with books stacked on every available surface and a guitar leaning against the window. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee and waited. He had learned long ago that when people came to him looking troubled, it was better to let them find their own words. "We've got a situation up on Bear Mountain," Peterson finally said, accepting the steaming mug. "You know, the old Hemlock property?" Marcus knew it well. Everyone in Cedar Ridge knew about the Hemlock place. It had been abandoned for 15 years, ever since Old Man Hemlock died, and left it to a nephew nobody had ever met. The property sat on 200 acres of prime woodland, with a decent house and several outbuildings slowly falling apart from neglect. "What's the problem?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from Peterson. The sheriff took a long sip of coffee, as if gathering strength. "Someone's been living up there. Has been for months now, maybe longer. Folks have been reporting strange sounds at night, lights moving through the trees, and—" Peterson paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, there have been incidents." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of incidents?" "Hikers getting scared off the trails, campers packing up and leaving in the middle of the night. Last week, the Thompson boy said he saw a wild man with long hair and ragged clothes throwing rocks at him from the tree line. Kid ran all the way home. Could be someone just looking for shelter?" Marcus suggested. "These are hard times for a lot of people." Peterson shook his head. "It's more than that. Yesterday, Sarah Mitchell went up to pick blackberries near the property line. She came back talking about hearing growling sounds and seeing someone moving through the brush like an animal. She swears she saw eyes watching her from the shadows." Marcus considered this. Cedar Ridge was the kind of place where stories grew in the telling. But Sarah Mitchell was known for her practical nature. If she said she saw something unsettling, there was probably truth to it. "The town council met last night," Peterson continued. "They're scared, Marcus. Tourism season is starting soon, and if word gets out that there's some dangerous hermit living on the mountain, it'll hurt business. They want something done." "What exactly are you asking me to do, Sheriff?" Peterson set down his coffee cup and looked Marcus directly in the eyes. "I need someone to go up there and find out what's really going on. Maybe talk to whoever it is. Convince them to move along peacefully. The council mentioned bringing in state police or even hiring professional security. But I convinced them to let me try a different approach first." Marcus understood. Peterson was a good man who preferred solving problems with words rather than force, but he was also nearing retirement, and his knees weren't what they used to be. The mountain terrain was rough, and if there really was someone unstable living up there, it could be dangerous work. "Why me?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because you're the only person I know who might be able to reach whoever this is," Peterson said. "You've got a way with people. Even difficult ones. Remember when you talked Jimmy Crawford out of that barn with nothing but patience and coffee? Or when you spent 3 hours with Mrs. Henderson's grandson until he admitted where he'd hidden her jewelry?" Marcus remembered. He also remembered that both situations had required him to look past what others saw as threatening behavior and find the hurt person underneath. Jimmy Crawford had been drunk and angry after losing his job. Not dangerous. Mrs. Henderson's grandson had been acting out because his parents were divorcing. Not because he was a thief. "The thing is," Peterson continued, "everyone's calling this person a monster. They're convinced he's some kind of threat. But what if he's just scared? What if he's someone who needs help instead of hunting? This was exactly what Marcus had been thinking. In his experience, people who seemed most frightening were often the most frightened themselves. Someone living alone in the wilderness, avoiding human contact, throwing rocks when approached. That sounded more like fear than aggression. "When do you need an answer?" Marcus asked. "Town council wants action by this weekend. If I can't handle it peacefully, they're calling in outside help. And between you and me, I don't think that'll end well for anyone involved." Marcus looked out his window toward the mountain. Bear Mountain rose steep and forested against the gray sky, its peaks hidden in low clouds. Somewhere up there, someone was living in isolation, probably cold and hungry and afraid. The townspeople were afraid too, afraid of the unknown, afraid of threats they imagined in the darkness. "I'll need a few days to prepare," Marcus said, "and I want to go alone." Peterson nodded, relief evident in his face. "I hoped you'd say that. But Marcus, be careful. We don't really know what we're dealing with up there. Take a radio, check in every few hours." After the sheriff left, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with a map of Bear Mountain spread before him. He traced possible routes to the Hemlock property with his finger, considering the best approaches. The direct path would be fastest, but if someone was already spooked and defensive, coming straight up the main trail might be seen as threatening. He decided to approach from the east, following deer paths and creek beds that would bring him to the property gradually. If someone was watching the main approaches, this route might allow him to observe the situation before making contact. Marcus spent the rest of the day gathering supplies. He packed light, a sleeping bag, basic food, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, and the radio Peterson had insisted on. He also packed things others might not think to bring. Extra food, warm clothes in larger sizes, soap, and a thermos that could hold hot coffee or soup. That evening, as he loaded his backpack, Marcus thought about what Peterson had said. Everyone was calling this unknown person a monster. But monsters weren't real. People were real. With real problems and real pain. Whatever he found up on Bear Mountain, he was determined to see the person behind the fear. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Marcus left before sunrise, hiking boots crunching on frost-covered leaves as he made his way up the mountain. The first few miles were familiar territory. Trails he had walked many times for recreation. But as he climbed higher and left the marked paths behind, the forest grew wilder and more remote. By midday, he could see smoke rising from somewhere near the Hemlock property. Someone was definitely there, and they had a fire going. Marcus approached carefully, moving quietly through the trees, trying to get close enough to observe without being seen. What he found would change everything he thought he knew about monsters and the people who fear them. Marcus crouched behind a fallen pine tree, studying the scene before him through the late afternoon shadows. The old Hemlock house sat in a clearing about 50 yards away, its once white paint now gray and peeling. Smoke drifted steadily from the chimney, and he could see that someone had made basic repairs. Boards nailed over broken windows. A tarp stretched across part of the roof where shingles had blown away. But what caught his attention wasn't the house itself. It was the garden. Someone had cleared a patch of land beside the house and planted vegetables. Neat rows of what looked like potatoes, squash, and late-season greens stretched across the cleared ground. A small greenhouse made from salvaged windows and scrap lumber protected more delicate plants. This wasn't the random campsite of a drifter. This was someone trying to make a life. Marcus was so focused on the garden that he almost missed the movement in his peripheral vision. A figure emerged from the tree line on the far side of the clearing. Carrying an armload of firewood, Marcus held perfectly still, watching. The person was tall and lean, wearing layers of patched clothing and a thick coat that had seen better years. Long, dark hair hung past their shoulders, and a full beard covered much of their face. From this distance, Marcus couldn't tell much about age or build, but the way the person moved suggested someone younger than the wild hermit the townspeople had imagined. The figure stacked the firewood beside the house, then paused, head tilted as if listening. After a moment, they disappeared around the back of the building. Marcus waited, counting to 60, then carefully began moving closer. He was halfway across the clearing when a voice called out from behind him. "That's far enough." Marcus stopped but didn't turn around immediately. The voice was deep but not threatening. More tired than angry. There was an accent there. Something he couldn't quite place. "I'm not armed," Marcus said, raising his hand slightly. "Turn around." Slowly. Marcus did as instructed, and found himself facing a man who looked to be in his late 20s, despite the heavy beard and weathered skin. Dark eyes watched Marcus with the wariness of someone who had learned to be careful around strangers. He held no weapon, but his stance suggested he was ready to run or fight if necessary. "You're on private property," the man said. "I know. I'm Marcus Williams from Cedar Ridge. Sheriff Peterson asked me to come up and check on things." The man's expression didn't change. "Check on what things?" "People in town have been worried. They've heard sounds, seen lights. Some folks got scared." Marcus kept his voice calm and conversational. "The sheriff wanted to make sure everything was okay up here." "Everything's fine. You can go back and tell them that." Marcus nodded toward the house. "Looks like you've done good work fixing the place up. The garden's impressive too." Something flickered in the man's eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or suspicion. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? Police, dogs, maybe someone with a gun telling me to get lost?" The man studied Marcus for a long moment. "Why did they send you?" "Because I asked to come. Because sometimes talking works better than forcing." Marcus took a slow step forward. "What's your name?" The man hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "David. David Kowalski. It's good to meet you, David. How long have you been living up here?" "Since spring. May, I think." David glanced back toward the house. "Look, I'm not causing trouble. I keep to myself, fix what I can, and I'll be gone when the snow gets too heavy." Marcus looked around the clearing again, noting details he had missed before. Solar panels, obviously salvaged but functional, provided power to a small shed. A rain collection system channeled water from the house's gutters into large barrels. This wasn't temporary shelter. This was someone building a sustainable homestead. "Doesn't look like you're planning to leave anytime soon," Marcus observed. David's shoulders tensed. "I said I'd be gone by winter. I'm not here to make you leave, David. I'm here because people in town are scared, and scared people sometimes do stupid things. I'd rather figure out how to make this work for everyone. There's nothing to figure out. I stay out of their way. They stay out of mine." Marcus shook his head. "It doesn't work like that. You've got hikers and campers using the trails that run near this property. When they see someone they don't recognize acting secretive, they get nervous. When they get nervous, they tell stories. And stories have a way of growing." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground. When he looked up again, his expression had changed. The wariness was still there. But underneath it, Marcus could see exhaustion. "I never meant to scare anyone," David said quietly. "I just wanted to be left alone." "Why?" Marcus asked gently. "What brought you up here?" David was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, the story began to emerge. David had been living in Detroit, working construction and trying to take care of his younger sister after their parents died. The construction industry had taken a hit, work became scarce, and medical bills from his sister's leukemia treatment had destroyed their finances. When she died the previous winter, David had lost not just his sister but everything else. Their apartment, his job, his sense of purpose. "I couldn't stay in the city," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything there reminded me of her. I heard about places where someone could disappear. Start over. A guy I worked with used to talk about this area, said there was empty land where nobody bothered you." Marcus listened without interrupting, recognizing the pain in David's voice. This wasn't a dangerous hermit, terrorizing hikers. This was a man who had lost everything, and was trying to rebuild some kind of life in the only way he knew how. "I never threw rocks at that kid," David added suddenly. "I was cutting firewood, and some branches fell. Maybe he heard them hit the ground, got scared, and ran. I never even saw him." What about the growling sounds people reported? David looked embarrassed. I built a root cellar behind the house. The door needs new hinges and it makes noise when it opens. Probably sounds strange if you don't know what it is. Marcus nodded, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Fear and imagination had transformed normal sounds and innocent activities into evidence of a dangerous presence. But David's isolation and defensive behavior had also contributed to the misunderstanding. The thing is, Marcus said carefully, people in town don't know your story. They just know someone's living up here and acting mysterious. That makes them nervous, especially with tourist season coming. So what are you suggesting? That I go down there and introduce myself? Tell them my business? Actually, yes, something like that. David stared at him. You're serious. I am. Look, you're not doing anything wrong by being here. As far as I know, you're not even technically trespassing. Nobody's paid taxes on this property in years. And there's probably a legal way to claim it. But hiding up here isn't going to work long term. People are already talking about bringing in state police. The color drained from David's face. I can't deal with police. Not now. Marcus heard something in David's tone that made him pause. Is there something you're not telling me? Are you running from something? No, nothing like that. David sat down heavily, on a tree stump. I'm not good with people anymore. After everything that happened, after losing Maria, I can barely handle being around strangers. The idea of going into town, answering questions, having everyone stare at me. He shook his head. I'd rather just move on. Marcus understood now. David wasn't hiding because he was dangerous. He was hiding because he was broken. The isolation wasn't about avoiding responsibility. It was about avoiding pain, but isolation wasn't healing him. It was just postponing the inevitable moment when he would have to rejoin the world. What if you didn't have to do it alone? Marcus asked. David looked up, surprised. What if someone went with you? Someone who could help explain things. Make introductions easier? You'd do that? Marcus realized he had just committed to something much more complicated than a simple fact-finding mission. But looking at David's face, seeing the hope and fear warring there, he knew he couldn't walk away. I'd do that. But first, you're going to have to trust me enough to come down from this mountain. As the sun began to set behind the trees, David and Marcus sat by the fire pit outside the house, sharing coffee and talking about what came next. Marcus had radioed Sheriff Peterson to report that he had made contact and needed more time to work things out. He had been deliberately vague about details, knowing that the full story would be better told in person. David had agreed to come to town, but only if Marcus stayed with him overnight and they went down together in the morning. It was a small request that felt enormous, the first step back toward a life connected to other people. Looking across the fire at David's face, illuminated by the flickering flames, Marcus realized that the monster everyone feared didn't exist. But the man who did exist was going to need all the help he could get. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, with low clouds clinging to the mountainside. Marcus had slept in his sleeping bag on the floor of the old house, while David took the single bed he had fashioned from salvaged materials. They had talked late into the night, and Marcus had learned more about the man the town feared. David had been an Eagle Scout as a kid, which explained his skill at wilderness living. He had 2 years of college before dropping out to work and support his family. He had never been arrested, never been in a fight, never even gotten a speeding ticket. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that the gentlest person he had met in years was the one everyone considered dangerous. As they prepared to leave, David moved around the house with nervous energy, checking and rechecking that everything was secure. He had agreed to come to town, but Marcus could see the fear in every gesture. What if they don't believe you? David asked, shouldering a small backpack. What if they think you're lying to protect me? Then we'll deal with that, Marcus said simply. But I think you'll be surprised. Most people in Cedar Ridge are good folks. They're scared because they don't understand the situation. Once they do, they'll want to help. David didn't look convinced, but he followed Marcus down the mountain path. They took the direct route this time, Marcus reasoning that there was no point in stealth now. As they walked, He pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the town and its people. Trying to ease David's anxiety, they reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge by mid-morning. The first person they encountered was Jenny Morrison, walking her golden retriever near the community park. Marcus waved, and Jenny started to wave back before noticing David. Her smile faded and she pulled her dog closer. Uncertainty replacing friendliness. "Morning, Jenny," Marcus called out cheerfully. "I'd like you to meet David Kowalski." "David, this is Jenny Morrison. She runs the flower shop on Main Street." David raised his hand in a tentative wave, and Marcus was proud to see him manage a small smile. Jenny looked between them, clearly trying to reconcile what she was seeing with whatever she had expected. "You're the..." she began, then caught herself. "I mean, you're staying up on the mountain?" "I was," David said quietly. "I hope I didn't cause any problems." Jenny's expression softened at the politeness in his voice. "Oh, no problems. We were just... well, we didn't know what to think." They talked for a few more minutes, Jenny's initial wariness melting away as David answered her questions about life on the mountain. When they parted, she was offering suggestions about which restaurant in town had the best coffee. The scene was repeated several times as they made their way toward the sheriff's office. Each encounter followed a similar pattern. Initial shock and suspicion, followed by curiosity. Then genuine friendliness, as people realized David posed no threat. Marcus watched David's confidence grow with each positive interaction. Sheriff Peterson was waiting for them on the steps of his office, along with Mayor Hendricks and 2 members of the town council. Marcus could see the tension in their faces as he approached with David, but he also saw Peterson's slight nod of approval. The sheriff had known Marcus long enough to trust his judgment. "Gentlemen," Marcus said as they climbed the steps, "I'd like you to meet David Kowalski." "David, this is Sheriff Peterson, Mayor Hendricks, and council members Watson and Fletcher." The introductions were formal but polite. Mayor Hendricks was a small, nervous man who seemed to be expecting someone much more intimidating. Councilmember Watson, a retired teacher, studied David with the same intensity she had once used to evaluate students. Fletcher, who owned the hardware store, looked mainly curious. "Why don't we go inside and talk?" Peterson suggested. In the sheriff's office, David told his story again, this time more confidently and with more detail. Marcus watched the faces around the room change as they learned about David's background and the reasons he had chosen to live on the mountain. By the time he finished, Mayor Hendricks was leaning forward with genuine interest, and Watson was asking practical questions about his garden and water systems. "So you're not actually a drifter," Fletcher said. "You're homesteading." "I suppose that's one way to put it," David agreed. "And the property taxes on the Hemlock place haven't been paid in how long?" Watson asked Peterson. 15 years. The county's been trying to figure out what to do with it." Watson nodded thoughtfully. "There's probably a legal path to claim it, if someone wanted to invest the time and money to research the title." Marcus could see where this was heading, but he let the conversation develop naturally. These were practical people who understood hard work and self-reliance. Once they saw David as someone trying to build something rather than someone trying to hide or cause trouble, their whole perspective shifted. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, Mayor Hendricks was talking about tourism opportunities, and Fletcher was offering to provide materials at cost for further improvements to the property. Watson had volunteered to research the legal status of the land, and Peterson was discussing ways to formalize David's presence, so there would be no more confusion about his right to be there. "There's just one thing," David said as the meeting was winding down. "I'm not really ready for a lot of visitors yet. I mean, I appreciate all your offers to help, but I still need time to get used to being around people again." "That's perfectly understandable," Watson said gently. "But you shouldn't isolate yourself completely. It's not healthy, and it's not necessary." Peterson nodded agreement. "What if we set up some kind of regular check-in? Maybe Marcus could visit weekly, just to make sure everything's okay and give you a connection to town?" Marcus found himself volunteering before he had fully thought it through. "I could do that. Actually, I've been thinking about taking some vacation time. Maybe I could help with some of the projects you have planned up there." David looked surprised and grateful. You'd want to do that? I would. It's beautiful up there, and I like working with my hands. Besides, Marcus grinned, someone needs to make sure you don't turn back into the mountain monster. The joke broke the remaining tension in the room, and everyone laughed, including David. As they left the sheriff's office, word had already begun to spread through town. Marcus wasn't surprised. Cedar Ridge was small enough that news traveled fast, especially news this interesting. But the reactions were different from what he had expected based on the fear he had encountered just days earlier. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose grandson Marcus had helped the year before, stopped them on the sidewalk to offer David a home-cooked meal. Tom Bradley from the auto repair shop wanted to know if David needed help with transportation. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had reported the frightening encounter in the woods, approached them outside the diner. I owe you an apology, she said to David directly. I let my imagination get the better of me. I should have tried to talk to you instead of running away. David shook his head. You don't owe me anything. I probably would have run away too, if I'd been in your position. Sarah smiled at his honesty. Well, now that we've met properly, I hope you'll feel comfortable saying hello if you see me picking berries again. That patch near your place is the best in the county. You're welcome to the berries anytime, David said. Just be careful near the root cellar. The door makes a terrible noise. Sarah laughed. So that's what I heard. I thought it was some kind of wild animal. The afternoon passed quickly as David met more townspeople and began to see Cedar Ridge not as a threat, but as a community he might actually want to be part of. Marcus watched the transformation with amazement. The fearful hermit of the morning was becoming a cautiously optimistic man with plans and possibilities. At the end of the day, as they prepared to return to the mountain, Mayor Hendricks pulled Marcus aside. I have to admit, this isn't what any of us expected, he said quietly. When we asked Peterson to handle the situation, I thought we were dealing with a dangerous vagrant, or maybe someone with serious mental health issues. What changed your mind? Marcus asked. Everything. The way he speaks, the respect he shows everyone. The fact that he's actually improving that property instead of just squatting there. And the way you vouched for him carries weight too. You don't make friends with people lightly. Marcus nodded. He's a good man who's been through hell. All he needed was a chance to show who he really is. Well, he's got that chance now. Question is, what are you planning to do about it? Marcus wasn't sure what the mayor meant until he saw the knowing look in the older man's eyes. What do you mean? I mean, you've been working at the hardware store for 3 years, and I've never seen you as engaged with anything as you are with this situation. Maybe it's time to think about what you really want to do with your life. The comment stuck with Marcus as he and David hiked back up the mountain that evening. He had enjoyed the day more than any day in recent memory. There was something satisfying about bridging the gap between fear and understanding, about helping people see past their assumptions to find common ground. That night, as they sat by the fire pit again, David brought up the subject. Peterson was serious about that weekly check-in idea, wasn't he? David asked. He was, and so was I. Good. Because I meant what I said about wanting help with the projects. I've been alone with my thoughts too long. It'll be good to have someone to talk to while we work. Marcus stared into the fire, thinking about the mayor's words and about the satisfaction he had felt watching David's confidence grow throughout the day. David, can I ask you something? Sure. When you were rebuilding your life up here, starting over, how did you know what you wanted to do? How did you figure out what came next? Over them. David was quiet for a moment. I guess I stopped trying to plan everything and started paying attention to what felt right. Why do you ask? Marcus told him about his conversation with Mayor Hendricks, about the sense that maybe he had been drifting through his own life without really engaging with it. I keep thinking about today, about how good it felt to help people understand each other, instead of just managing problems after they explode. Sounds like you might have found something worth pursuing, David said. Maybe, but it would mean making some big changes. David chuckled. Well, if you're looking for advice about making big changes, you're talking to an expert. The thing is, the scariest changes often turn out to be the best ones. As Marcus settled into his sleeping bag that night, he thought about the day's events and about the future he had never considered before. 3 days earlier, the townspeople had sent him to deal with a monster. Instead, he had found a friend and possibly a new direction for his own life. The monster had never existed. But the possibility of something better, for David, for the town, and for Marcus himself, was just beginning. 6 months later, Marcus would leave the hardware store to start a conflict resolution practice, helping communities address problems before they escalated into fear and misunderstanding. David would successfully claim legal ownership of the Hemlock property and establish a small organic farm that supplied restaurants in town. And the hiking trails that had once been sources of fear would become popular destinations, with David often serving as an informal guide for visitors interested in sustainable living. The story would become part of Cedar Ridge folklore. The time they sent Marcus Williams to deal with the mountain monster, and he came back with a neighbor instead.